Diane Keaton spent 8 years and $11 million over her original purchase price, building a house inspired by a mood board app, then wrote an entire book about the process. It just sold for $23 million. But the real story isn't the price. It's that Diane Keaton designed her own dream home from a Pinterest board before most people even knew what Pinterest was. In March 2025, 7 months before her death, Keaton quietly listed the Sullivan Canyon home she'd said she'd never sell for $29 million. That alone raised eyebrows. This wasn't a random property in her portfolio. This was the house she wrote a book about. But that's only part of the story, because what happened next turned a real estate listing into one of the most closely watched property sagas in Los Angeles. Keaton passed away on the 11th of October 2025 at age 79. Just weeks before that, in September, the listing had quietly vanished from the market, no explanation given. Then, almost 2 months after her death, her children relisted the same house, this time at $27 million, still telling the same story her book had told years earlier. Over the following months, the price dropped again to $26.9 million, then to $22.9 million, before finally landing under contract this August at roughly $23 million. That's a $6 million drop from her original ask, nearly 20%, on a house she once swore she'd live in forever. A property that changed price 4 separate times before it changed hands even once. So why did a working actress with an Oscar and a decades-long career as what insiders describe as a serial house flipper treat this one property differently? Here's where things get interesting. Keaton was famous in real estate circles long before this sale for buying, restoring, and reselling homes across Los Angeles, almost as a second career, moving through property after property, rarely settling anywhere for long. This house broke that pattern entirely. She bought the land in 2011 for $4.7 million. Not a finished house, just a property in Sullivan Canyon, a secluded, equestrian-flavored pocket of Los Angeles tucked between Brentwood and the Pacific Palisades, the kind of neighborhood where privacy isn't marketed, it's assumed, and horse trails outnumber sidewalks. The original structure had been designed decades earlier by Cliff May, the architect widely credited with inventing the California ranch house style. Most buyers would have renovated it and moved on within a few years. Keaton tore into the concept from the ground up and stayed. And that's not even the most impressive part. Keaton didn't hire a designer and hand over creative control the way most celebrities do. She built her own mood boards. On Pinterest, years before Pinterest inspired, was a phrase anyone used to describe a house. She was introduced to the app by director Nancy Meyers, known for the aspirational, over-designed kitchens in films like Something's Gotta Give. Keaton later described how pinning image after image let the fantasy of a dream home fully take shape in her head before a single wall came down. That process alone took 3.5 years of design and construction before she ever moved in. Part of a renovation journey that stretched across roughly 8 years from purchase to finished product, longer than most people spend on an entire career change. But the building itself is only half the story. What she actually built was strange, in the best possible sense. Picture a house that looks like it grew out of a barn and a Chicago factory at the same time. Keaton worked with architect David Tackix and designers Stephen Shadley, Cynthia Carlson, and Tobin Windall to source 75,000 reclaimed bricks from Chicago, individually salvaged, not manufactured to look old, actually old, and use them to sheath much of the exterior along with entire rooms inside. That's enough reclaimed brick to build several ordinary houses from the ground up, all of it hauled across the country just for texture. Exposed wooden ceiling beams run through the main living spaces. Farmhouse doors and industrial pendant lighting show up throughout. And in her own writing about the project, Keaton pointed to an unlikely source of inspiration: the story of the 3 little pigs, a fable about building something sturdy enough to survive anything trying to tear it down. For a woman who had spent decades buying and reselling houses without much sentiment attached, that detail alone signals this project was different from the start. Yet, stepping into the kitchen reveals the one room that mattered to her more than any other. Cabinet fronts wrapped in chicken wire instead of solid wood, a large vintage clock mounted as a centerpiece, rustic wood beams overhead, and the same industrial pendant lighting found throughout the rest of the house. Keaton once said, in an interview about the home, that this exact room was her favorite space in the entire property, out of a nearly 9,200 square foot main residence sitting on more than half an acre of Sullivan Canyon land. Not the primary suite, not the great room. The kitchen, the one room most homeowners treat as purely functional, became the emotional center of an 8-year architectural project. And here's a detail most coverage of the sale barely touched on. Keaton didn't just decorate with objects, she decorated with language. Listing photos show entire sentences painted directly onto the walls throughout the house, alongside high windows that flood the black and white interior with daylight, and a great room lined with French doors opening straight onto an outdoor patio. The overall palette stays almost entirely black and white, but the texture never stops moving. Reclaimed wood against brick, metal fixtures against soft furnishings, a look that reads minimalist in color and maximalist in feeling at the exact same time. Beyond the main house, the property includes includes a separate guest cottage, a private garage, and a pool tucked into the grounds, giving the estate the layout of a small, self-contained compound rather than a single structure. Here's where the story pulls back out to the bigger picture. In 2017, Keaton published the entire process as a 272-page book called The House That Pinterest Built, walking readers through years of pinned images, design decisions, and renovation choices most celebrities never explain publicly at all. It wasn't a coffee table flex, it was closer to a diary, and it turned this specific house, out of every property she ever owned across a career of buying, renovating, and reselling homes throughout Los Angeles, into the one people actually recognized by name, the one referenced in design articles for years after the book came out, long before it ever hit the market. That's what makes the ending of this story land differently than most celebrity real estate sales. This wasn't a house Keaton flipped for profit and moved on from. She lived there with her 2 children and her golden retriever, Emma, from around 2015 onward, for roughly a decade, longer than she stayed in almost any other property she ever owned. When she listed it in March 2025, she'd previously told people she planned to live there permanently. Nobody outside her immediate circle knows exactly why that changed. What's certain is that her family chose to keep the house on the market after her passing, rather than take it off entirely, ultimately letting it sell for roughly $6 million less than her original asking price, but to a buyer who was very clearly paying for more than square footage. Josh Flagg of Compass, who held the final listing, said Keaton had one of the defining design perspectives of her generation. That same month, Bonham's auction house sold off a separate piece of her legacy in New York, including an original script from Annie Hall, the film that made her a star nearly 50 years earlier. 2 very different auctions, one actress, one clear thread running through both. Everything Diane Keaton touched, she made unmistakably her own, down to the chicken wire on her kitchen cabinets. A serial house flipper who treated dozens of properties as temporary projects finally built the one house she couldn't bring herself to treat that way. And even after she was gone, it took 4 price cuts and nearly a full year for the market to let it go too. It's worth sitting with how unusual that timeline actually is in Los Angeles real estate. Most high-profile celebrity listings move fast, priced aggressively, and sold within weeks to buyers eager to attach a famous name to their new address. This one took the opposite path, correction after correction, month after month, as if the market itself needed time to figure out how to value a house that was never really built to be sold in the first place. Keaton hadn't designed it for resale value or investment upside. She'd designed it the way she approached everything in her career, on her own terms, with her own eye, refusing to follow a template anyone else had already written. What do you think made this house worth $23 million? The design, the story, or the legacy behind it? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy exploring the incredible homes, hidden estates, and lifestyles of the world's biggest celebrities, subscribe to Fame Trek. Every week, we take you inside another extraordinary celebrity home and uncover the story behind it.